My name is Cassidy Rhodes and I'm 31 years old. 2 months ago, my parents sold our family home for $2.4 million. The exact same house I'd contributed $250,000 to 9 years earlier, and planned to hand every single dollar of the profit to my sister. When I asked about my legal share, my mother's response was simple, cold and devastating. Be happy for your sister's new start. She needs it more. $250,000. Gone, just like that, erased by a mother who decided I was too independent to need it, and too compliant to fight back. But here's the massive miscalculation they made. They forgot what I do for a living. I am a vice president of wealth management. I don't just help out, I invest, and I kept the paperwork. A signed dated legal agreement from 2017 promising me 35% of the house's value whenever it's sold. They thought it was just family paperwork. Who sues family, right? 1 hour after I made a single phone call, the real estate agent contacted me. The sale was entirely frozen. A legal hold had been placed on the title. Your parents, she told me, are not handling it well. Before I tell you exactly what happened in that conference room, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely want to hear how this ends. Drop a comment, and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. I'd love to know. To understand how my parents genuinely convinced themselves I had forgotten about $250,000, you have to understand the role I was assigned at birth. Growing up in Seattle, the rules were unspoken but absolute. I was the glass child. The solid, invisible foundation. My older sister Brianna was the storm. Brianna is 5 years older than me. While I spent my nights studying, driven by a quiet, desperate need to be good enough, Brianna bounced from disaster to disaster. She dropped out of college twice. She moved back into my parents' house, leaving a trail of half-finished hobbies and broken relationships. When she finally scraped together a marketing degree, she never used it. Instead, at 23, she married Dustin, a smooth-talking guy who sold medical supplies and had a knack for avoiding responsibility. 3 kids followed in rapid, chaotic succession. Brianna's identity hardened like wet cement. She was the one who needed help. I, on the other hand, graduated at the top of my class with a finance degree. I walked straight into a high-pressure job at Sterling & Reed. I never asked my parents for a dime after I moved out at 21. I thought my independence would earn their pride. Instead, it painted a target on my back. It turned me into the family ATM. The requests always followed the same tense rhythm. A phone call late at night. My mother's voice, tight with rehearsed worry. Cassidy, your sister's transmission blew. Or Dustin's commission check was short this month, and the kids need braces. Can you help her out, just this once? My mother would ask. It was never just once. My cursor hovers over a cell dated April 2021. I close my eyes, and the memory of that Easter Sunday hits me so hard I can almost smell the roasting ham. Brianna had been sobbing in the guest bathroom for an hour. Her marriage was falling apart. She needed money for emergency couples therapy, she claimed, and a romantic trip to Hawaii to reconnect. Dustin had told her they needed to remember why they fell in love. I transferred the funds right there at the dinner table. Hiding my phone under my napkin, I wanted the crying to stop. I wanted the heavy, suffocating tension in the house to lift. An hour later, as I washed dishes in the kitchen, I quietly asked my mother when Brianna might start paying it back. I wasn't angry, just tired. My mother stopped wiping the counter. The forced, pleasant smile vanished from her face. She stepped close, grabbing my arm just above the elbow. Her fingers dug in, surprisingly strong. Don't be petty, Cassidy, she whispered. Her voice was barely a hiss over the sound of the running water, her eyes darting toward the hallway to make sure no one heard. Your sister's marriage is hanging by a thread. You have a good job. You live in a beautiful apartment. You don't need that money to survive. She let go of my arm and smoothed my collar, a sickeningly sweet gesture that made my stomach turn. You're the one with the ability, sweetie. Your sister just doesn't have your brain. I stood frozen at the sink, the hot water burning my hands. For 30 years I swallowed that line. I took it as a twisted compliment. It took a betrayal so deep it shattered my world to finally realize it was just a weapon. A convenient way to drain me dry while making me feel like I was doing the right thing. By the time I was 29, I had quietly handed over $55,000 in undocumented loans. Birthday gifts that were actually massive credit card payments. Christmas checks that covered Brianna's rent. But all of that was just pocket change compared to what happened next. The real nightmare, the trap that would eventually blow my family into pieces, started with my grandfather, and the life-altering secret he left behind. The true inciting incident of this entire nightmare didn't start with a fight. It started with a cold, unforgiving January morning in 2017, and the quiet death of the only person in my family who actually saw me. My grandfather, Arthur Sterling, was 90 years old when his heart finally gave out. He had run a local hardware store for 40 years before retiring. His hands were always rough, stained with decades of oil and sawdust, but his mind was as sharp as a newly honed blade. He knew the exact value of $1, and more importantly, he knew human nature. He could spot a liar from across the room. During my brutal college semesters, when I was drowning in finance exams and internships, I still sacrificed my Saturday afternoons. I would drive 50 minutes through the relentless gray Seattle rain to his assisted living facility in Bellevue. I didn't do it out of a sense of duty. I did it because those four walls were the only place I didn't feel like a walking bank account. We would sit by the window, the radiator hissing a steady rhythm against the cold glass, playing chess on a scarred wooden board. We watched crackling black and white movies, and he would tell me stories about surviving the Great Depression. He taught me that security wasn't just about money, it was about not owing your soul to anyone. Brianna, on the other hand, treated him like an obligation to be managed. She visited maybe twice a year, Christmas and his birthday. Most weeks she'd just send a brief text, usually when she needed a check for the kids' clothes. He never complained, but I saw the way his eyes lingered on the silent phone. He knew. So when February rolled around and we all gathered in a stuffy wood-paneled lawyer's office for the reading of his will, nobody should have been surprised. The room smelled of floor wax and old paper. Outside, the rain lashed against the heavy glass windows. My mother sat rigid in a leather chair, her hands folded tightly in her lap, wearing her best black dress. Brianna was next to her, checking her phone under the table. I sat near the door, my chest still aching with a hollow, heavy grief. The lawyer, a tired-looking man with wire-rimmed glasses, cleared his throat. He handed out the minor items first. Brianna got Grandpa's antique silver set. My mother received the heirloom landscape painting she had always coveted. My father got the vintage Rolex that had been ticking in the family for generations. Then the lawyer looked down at the heavy parchment paper, his voice perfectly even. And to my granddaughter, Cassidy Jane Rhodes, I leave the sum of $250,000 so that she may have a solid, unbreakable financial foundation for her future. The silence that fell over the room wasn't just quiet, it was a physical weight. It sucked the air straight out of my lungs. My mother's head snapped up. She didn't look at the lawyer. She looked directly at me. Her face went entirely slack, as if she had been physically struck, before hardening into a mask of pure, freezing disbelief. 2 days later, at the funeral reception in my parents' gloomy dining room, that disbelief turned into poison. I was standing alone near the kitchen doorway, holding a paper cup of lukewarm coffee. The smell of decaying lilies and damp wool coats made me slightly nauseous. I was staring blankly at the floor, thinking about the empty chair at Grandpa's chessboard, when my mother's shadow fell over me. She stepped so close I could feel the heat radiating off her. She boxed me into the corner, blocking me from the view of the other grieving guests. "You must have manipulated him," she hissed. Her voice was low, vibrating with a venom I had never heard before. "When he was weak, when his mind was failing." I blinked, stepping back until my shoulders hit the doorframe. "Mom, what are you talking about? His mind was perfect. He beat me at chess 3 days before he died." Her eyes swept over me, cold and calculating. The motherly warmth she usually wore for the cameras was completely gone. "He always loved Brianna more," she whispered, her fingernails tapping a frantic, angry rhythm against her plastic cup. "Brianna gave him great-grandchildren. You just sat there in his room plotting. You took advantage of an old man, Cassidy." My breath hitched. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. She wasn't grieving her father. She was grieving the loss of control over $250,000. I didn't argue. My finance training kicked in, throwing up cold, protective walls around my heart. You don't negotiate with someone who operates in bad faith. I simply walked away from her, leaving my coffee on the counter. The very next morning, the moment the inheritance cleared, I wired every single cent straight into a high-yield account. I took a certified, notarized copy of his will, drove to Chase Bank, and locked it inside a steel safety deposit box. It clearly stated his intention: money for my foundation. I thought locking it in a vault would keep it safe. I had no idea my parents were already building a trap to pry it out of my hands. The silence lasted exactly 2 months. It was a cold, calculated quiet, meant to make me feel isolated. Then, in June 2017, my phone buzzed with a text from my mother. It didn't ask how my new job was going. It simply read, "Come over for dinner tonight. We have a wonderful family opportunity to discuss." Looking back, the word opportunity should have sent me running. Instead, I drove to the house I grew up in, a two-story colonial in the suburbs that always felt a little too dark on the inside. I sat on the faded floral sofa in the living room. The June heat pressed against the windows, but the air inside was stiff and heavy. I noticed a brown water stain creeping across the ceiling above the fireplace, a clear sign the roof was failing. The kitchen floorboards creaked under my father's feet as he nervously paced, avoiding my gaze. They had set a trap, and they were waiting for me to step into it. My father finally sat down in his leather armchair. He leaned forward, clasping his hands together tightly. His knuckles were white. "Cassidy," he started, clearing his throat. "We've been doing some financial planning. Your mother and I bought this house in 19... Today it's worth about $800,000. My finance brain automatically clicked into gear. I nodded slowly. "That's a solid return, Dad." "Yes," he said, shifting his weight. He wouldn't look me in the eye. "But we still owe about $180,000 on the mortgage." I frowned, the math instantly rejecting his statement. "You bought it 25 years ago for $190,000. How do you still owe that much?" My mother, who had been standing silently by the doorway like a guard, stepped into the room. Her smile was tight, her eyes gleaming with rehearsed intensity. "We had to refinance, Cassidy. Multiple times. Brianna's weddings, her debts, the kids. Family helps family." A cold knot formed in my stomach. I knew where this was going. The air in the room suddenly felt very thin. "The roof needs replacing," my father continued, his voice dropping an octave. "And the kitchen is falling apart. If we take out another loan, the interest will ruin us. So we have a proposal. An investment." I gripped the edge of the sofa cushion. "An investment. If you contribute your $250,000, my father explained, the numbers rushing out of him now like a rehearsed script, "we can pay off the mortgage completely. The remaining $70,000 will cover a brand new roof and a full kitchen renovation. In exchange, you will own 35% of the home's gross value when it eventually sells. Think of it as a guaranteed return. Real estate in Seattle only goes up." I stopped breathing. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked, loud and heavy. "Your $250,000. Literally every cent to my name. My safety net. The only thing standing between me and the crushing anxiety of being totally alone in the world. They wanted it all." And my mother added, stepping closer, playing her trump card with deadly precision, "It means your father and I won't have a housing payment anymore. We can finally retire in peace." She tilted her head, her voice dropping into a soft, sorrowful whisper. "It's exactly what Grandpa Arthur would have wanted you to do with the money. Support the family." The sheer manipulation of using my dead grandfather's name hit me like a physical blow. My chest tightened. I looked from my father, who was staring at his shoes, to my mother, who was watching me with unblinking focus. I hesitated. I didn't say no, but I didn't say yes. I just sat there, paralyzed by the weight of their expectation. My mother saw that hesitation, and the sweet, sorrowful mask vanished in a fraction of a second. Her posture stiffened. Her eyes hardened into dark, sharp stones. "Don't you trust us, Cassidy?" she asked. It wasn't a question, it was a threat. The room grew freezing cold. "We're your parents. We put a roof over your head for 21 years. Are you really going to sit there and hoard that money in a bank account while we struggle with a mortgage we can't afford?" She took a step closer, standing over me. "Are you really that selfish?" My heart hammered wildly against my ribs. The walls of the living room felt like they were shrinking, pressing in on me. I was 22 years old, sitting on the same sofa where I used to do my homework, feeling like a trapped animal. I needed to get out of that house. I needed to breathe. "I need to think about it," I whispered, standing up so fast I almost knocked over the coffee table. I didn't wait for them to respond. I grabbed my keys and walked out the front door, the sound of my mother's disappointed sigh following me all the way to my car. I locked myself in my car, the damp Seattle night instantly fogging the windows. My hands shook so badly I could barely grip the leather steering wheel. I sat in the dark driveway, staring at the dimly lit windows of my childhood home. Inside, my parents were probably already celebrating, entirely confident I would cave. I was 22, but sitting in that driver's seat, I felt like a terrified child. I pulled out my phone and dialed Maya. We had been best friends since freshman year at the University of Washington. Maya was a pre-law major, ruthlessly logical, and the only person outside my family who knew the exact dollar amount of my grandfather's gift. She picked up on the second ring. "I need your brain," I whispered, my voice trembling. I explained the pitch. The mortgage, the roof, The 35% equity. The heavy suffocating guilt trip. Cassidy, absolutely not. Maya barked through the phone. Her voice was sharp, cutting straight through the fog of my panic. Do not give them cash. They are trying to liquidate your entire future to fix their past mistakes. But they're my parents, I argued weakly, the lifelong programming fighting back. They said it's a guaranteed return. Real estate. Real estate is only a return if they actually sell and actually pay you. Maya interrupted, her tone lowering into a deadly serious register. Listen to me. If you are going to let them guilt you into this, you need a contract. Not a promise. Not a handshake over a pot roast. A legally binding piece of paper. If they balk at signing it, you have your answer about their true intentions. I closed my eyes. Maya was right. My finance training told me she was right. But the thought of demanding a contract from my own mother made my stomach twist into knots. The next evening, I walked back into that stifling living room. My parents were waiting, their faces arranged in identical expressions of hopeful expectation. I stood by the door, refusing to sit on the floral sofa. I'll do it, I said. My voice was tight, but I need a formal written agreement outlining the 35% equity. My parents looked at each other, and then, they laughed. It wasn't a warm, amused sound. It was a sharp, scoffing laugh. My mother rolled her eyes dramatically, crossing her arms over her chest. Fine, she sneered, her tone dripping with condescension. If you want to treat your own family like a cold corporate transaction, fine, we will play your little game. My father didn't argue. He walked into his home office and booted up his desktop computer. I stood in the doorway, listening to the heavy, aggressive clack of his fingers hitting the keys. He was angry. I was insulting their honor, their parental authority. 10 minutes later, the printer hummed to life. The agreement he handed me wasn't full of dense legal jargon, but it was incredibly clear. One page. It stated that I, Cassidy Rhodes, was contributing $250,000 to the property located at their specific address. In exchange, this contribution represented a 35% equity stake in the home's gross market value, to be paid out immediately upon the sale or transfer of the property. I read every word twice. Then I watched my parents sign it in blue ink. Their strokes were quick, careless. They didn't take the document seriously. To them, it was just a pacifier to calm me down so I would open my wallet. I signed my name at the bottom. June 20th, 2017. The next morning, I took the original crisp white page and drove to Chase Bank. I walked into the quiet, temperature-controlled vault. The air smelled of old paper and polished steel. It cost me $90 a year to rent a safety deposit box. I placed the contract inside, closed the heavy metal door, and turned the key. It felt like locking away a piece of my soul, but it would turn out to be the best investment of my life. On June 22nd, I wired the $250,000. I watched the balance on my banking app plummet from a fortune to almost zero. I had never felt so vulnerable in my entire life. The years passed. The seasons in Seattle bled from gray winters to brief, brilliant summers, and I buried myself in work. I climbed the brutal corporate ladder at Sterling & Reed. I went from a junior analyst quietly crunching numbers in a cubicle, to an account manager, and finally, to vice president of wealth management. I earned my CFA license. I learned how to build airtight portfolios for millionaires. I bought a reliable car, moved into a sleek apartment in Capitol Hill, maxed out my 401k, and built a fortress of stability around myself. Meanwhile, my parents lived completely mortgage-free for 9 solid years. All thanks to my grandfather's money. All thanks to me. Brianna's life, however, spiraled further into chaos. She and Dustin had 3 kids, Lily in 2018, Leo in 2020, and Mia in 2022. Brianna flat out refused to get a job. The kids need a present mother, she would argue defensively at Thanksgiving dinners, despite having them in daycare 3 days a week so she could go to Pilates. Dustin's medical supply income barely covered the basics. And through it all, the phone calls from my mother never stopped. Living without a mortgage somehow wasn't enough to cover their endless emergencies. In the dead of winter in 2022, my phone rang at midnight. Cassidy, the furnace died. We're freezing. Could you front the $15,000? I paid it. In 2023, a massive property tax reassessment hit. It's just $7,000, honey. Consider it an additional investment in your future share of the house. My mother cooed over the phone, her voice smooth and sweet. I paid it. Then came the rotting deck repairs. The sudden plumbing issue. I kept a meticulous Excel spreadsheet on my personal laptop. I treated my family like a failing corporate asset. Over 9 years, in addition to the initial $250,000, I had transferred exactly $42,000 in undocumented emergency funds to my parents' checking account. The memo lines on the bank transfers read, "Furnace, taxes, deck." By the time I was 31, I had sunk nearly $300,000 into my family's survival. I thought I was buying peace. I didn't realize I was just funding my own eventual replacement. Then the fragile house of cards finally collapsed. In August 2025, Dustin packed a single suitcase and walked out on Brianna. He left her for a younger colleague he had met at a medical supply conference in Denver. The divorce was fast and brutal. Dustin had always been slippery. He kept the house. He had cleverly bought it under his name alone a year before they were legally married. Brianna walked away with half his retirement account, a meager child support agreement, 3 confused kids, and absolutely nowhere to live. Within a week, she moved her entire chaotic life back into my parents' house. Suddenly, the gravity of my family shifted entirely. Every dinner I attended, every phone call I answered, every frantic group text thread centered on one obsessive, desperate mission: how do we save Brianna? I sat at the edges of these conversations, offering practical financial advice that was immediately ignored. I suggested budgeting apps. I suggested Brianna use her degree to get an entry-level marketing job. My mother looked at me like I had suggested throwing the children out into the snow. Then, in November 2025, the hammer fell. My phone rang on a dark, rainy Tuesday night. "We've made a huge decision," my mother announced. Her voice was breathless, vibrating with a strange, nervous energy. "Your father and I are selling the house. We found a cash buyer, an older couple who want to close fast." I sat up straight on my couch. My heart gave a sudden hard thump. After 9 years of waiting, of paying for furnaces and property taxes, the finish line was finally here. The contract was going to trigger. December 10, 2020. I was sitting at my desk at Sterling & Reed. My corner office was perfectly quiet, the thick glass walls blocking out the hum of the trading floor outside. The air conditioning breathed a steady, cool rhythm. Outside my window, the Seattle skyline was wrapped in thick gray fog. I was deep into reviewing a massive year-end portfolio for a client, my brain entirely in finance mode, evaluating risk, calculating yields, looking for weak spots. My cell phone lit up on the dark mahogany desk. "Mom." I put down my pen and answered, expecting a quick update on the moving boxes. "Cassidy," she sang into the phone. The sheer volume of her voice made me pull the receiver slightly away from my ear. "Wonderful news. The sale is totally finalized. The buyers signed their end an hour ago." "That's great, Mom," I said, leaning back in my leather chair. "What were the final numbers?" $2.4 million, she breathed, drawing out the syllables like she was tasting them. $2.4 million day, Cassidy. Can you believe it? We bought it for $190,000 back in '92. My finance brain didn't celebrate, it just did the math. It was an automatic reflex. $2.4 million gross. Minus the standard 6% real estate agent commission and estimated closing costs. The net proceeds would be roughly $2.2 million. My contractual 35% of that net was $770,000. Add in the $42,000 they still owed me for the documented repairs, and I was looking at $812,000. I pulled up a blank digital notepad on my monitor. My hands were perfectly steady. Finally, my grandfather's seed money had grown. The safety net I had sacrificed at 22 was coming back to me, strong enough to secure my entire future. "That's incredible, Mom," I said, typing the $812,000 figure onto the blank white screen. I stared at the numbers. They felt like a heavy, warm blanket settling over my shoulders. "So when does escrow clear? We need to talk about the distribution for my share of the equity so I can give my bank the incoming wire instructions." The silence on the line was immediate. It wasn't a normal pause. It was the sudden, total absence of sound. Even her breathing seemed to stop. The quiet stretched for 3 seconds. 4. 5. The cool air in my office suddenly felt freezing. "Oh, honey. No." Her voice was light, casual, so casually dismissive that it made the blood drain directly out of my face. I stopped typing. I stopped breathing. The faint hum of the air conditioning suddenly sounded like a jet engine roaring in my ears. "We've decided to give the entire profit to Brianna," my mother continued, completely ignoring the dead silence on my end. Her tone was bright and breezy, like she was discussing a change in dinner plans, not the theft of nearly $1 million. "She needs it more than anyone, Cassidy. Poor thing lost everything in that awful divorce. She needs a massive down payment for a nice house in a good school district, and a cushion to get back on her feet.
My fingers hovered frozen over my keyboard.
The screen blurred slightly. Your father and I are going to take just enough to downsize to a small condo, she rambled on, her voice picking up speed, fueled by her own manufactured excitement, and the rest goes directly to your sister. It's a fresh start for her. Isn't that wonderful?
Mom?
My voice was barely a whisper. The heavy mahogany desk beneath my hands felt like it was dropping out from under me. I waited for her to laugh. I waited for her to say it was a joke. But the silence stretched, thick and suffocating. When she finally spoke again, her tone had shifted completely. The breezy motherly warmth vanished in an instant, replaced by a cold, dismissive steel. That was your contribution to this family, Cassidy, she said, her voice flattening out. Your investment in our well-being. You have done incredibly well for yourself. You're a vice president. You have a luxury apartment in Capitol Hill. Brianna is a single mother with nothing. We had an agreement, I said, my voice rising. My heart hammered wildly against my ribs, a frantic trapped bird. I stood up, my chair rolling back and hitting the glass wall of my office with a dull thud. Dad typed it. You both signed it. That was my inheritance from Grandpa. It wasn't a gift. Oh please, she actually laughed. It was a harsh, mocking sound that scraped against my ears. That was just family paperwork to make you feel important when you were 22. Nobody in their right mind is going to hold you to a piece of paper from 9 years ago. It's a contract, I choked out, my throat tight with a mix of panic and pure blinding rage. We are a family, Cassidy, not a corporation, she snapped, her patience completely gone. Stop being so greedy. Be happy for your sister. She's getting a second chance at life, and that is what matters. I have to go pack. The line went dead. She hung up on me. I stood in the middle of my perfectly organized, temperature-controlled office for 20 solid minutes. My computer screen went black, my reflection staring back at me in the dark monitor. Outside the thick glass walls, the bustling wealth management floor moved in a blur. Junior analysts carrying files, phones blinking, millions of dollars changing hands. But inside my office, time had completely stopped. Something inside me finally broke. It wasn't a loud snap. It was the quiet, violent shattering of a dam built over 31 years. 31 years of accommodation, of swallowing my own needs, of paying for furnaces and vacations just to buy a scrap of their approval. They didn't just take my money. They erased me. They looked at a $2.4 million check and decided I simply didn't exist. I didn't sleep that night. I paced the hardwood floors of my apartment, the city lights of Seattle glowing coldly through the windows. I replayed every single holiday where Brianna's manufactured crises took center stage. I replayed my parents living mortgage-free for nearly a decade on my dime, smiling at me across the dinner table while secretly planning to hand my future to my sister. At 5:30 a.m., the sky outside was a bruised, dark purple. I picked up my phone and called Maya. "What time is it?" She groaned, her voice thick with sleep. 5:30. "I need a lawyer," I said, my voice empty of everything except a freezing, hollow calm. "Today." The line went quiet for exactly 2 seconds. Then I heard the rustle of sheets as Maya sat up. "Tell me everything." I told her. I told her about the phone call, the $2.4 million sale, and the casual way my mother had brushed off the agreement. By the time I finished, Maya was radiating absolute fury through the phone. "I told you," she whispered, her voice shaking with anger. "I told you 9 years ago, Cassidy. Tell me you have the original." I was sitting at my kitchen island. An hour earlier, I had driven to Chase Bank the moment the vault opened. The crisp white paper, dated June 20th, 2017, sat perfectly flat on the granite counter. The blue ink of their signatures practically glowed under the kitchen lights. "When is the closing?" Maya asked, her lawyer brain already shifting into overdrive. I pulled up the forwarded email chain my mother had cluelessly copied me on weeks ago, back when she still thought I was just a helpful silent daughter. "Thursday, December 18th. Next week." "Good," Maya said, her voice dropping into a deadly serious register. "Cassidy, listen to me. What family takes $250,000 from their 22-year-old daughter, lives rent-free for a decade, and then steals the profit?" I closed my eyes. "A bad one. A family of parasites," Maya corrected sharply. "If a stranger did this to you, you'd call the FBI for wire fraud. Do not give them a pass just because you share DNA. We are going to war. What if I lose them, Maya?" The words slipped out of my mouth before I could stop them. Even after the shock, even after the brutal reality of what my mother had done, that small, pathetic part of me, The good daughter who just wanted to belong was terrified. What if dropping a legal bomb on this sale blows up the entire family forever? Maya sighed. The sharp, aggressive edge left her voice, replaced by a heavy, quiet sadness. Cassidy, she said softly, they already left you. They erased you the second they saw a $2.4 million check. A family that treats you like an ATM isn't a family. It's a bank. And they just defaulted. I stared at the city skyline outside my window. The gray morning light was creeping over the buildings, cold and indifferent. Defaulted. The word clicked perfectly into my finance-wired brain. When a bad investment defaults, you don't cry over it. You don't try to fix it with love. You cut your losses and you send in the collectors. Who do I call? I asked. That afternoon, the Seattle rain was falling in heavy, freezing sheets. I walked through the sliding glass doors of Thorne & Associates, my soaked trench coat heavy on my shoulders. I was led into the corner office of Elias Thorne. He was a real estate litigator in his mid-50s, wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal suit. He had the calm, predatory stillness of a man who destroyed people's lives for a living and slept perfectly fine at night. I liked him immediately. I sat in a leather chair across from his massive mahogany desk. Without saying a word, I laid out the weapons. The 2017 agreement my father had typed, the wire transfer receipts from Chase Bank, the Excel spreadsheet showing the $42,000 in emergencies, and a copy of Grandpa Arthur's will. Elias picked up the single-page agreement. He read it in total silence. I watched his eyes track across the paper. As a vice president of wealth management, I spent my life reading the micro-expressions of nervous clients and confident investors. Elias gave away nothing. The heavy grandfather clock in the corner of his office ticked down the seconds. The silence stretched so long that my stomach began to knot. What if it was too vague? What if it wasn't binding? Finally, he set the paper down and looked up. "Miss Rhodes," Elias said, his voice a low, smooth baritone. "Your parents assumed this was family paperwork because it wasn't drafted by a lawyer. They were gravely mistaken. Under Washington state law, this is a fully enforceable equity contract. The consideration is clear. The intent is undeniable. The signatures are completely valid." I exhaled a breath I felt like I'd been holding since 2017. The tension in my neck uncoiled slightly. "However," Elias continued, tapping a silver pen against the crisp white paper. The cold reality of the law settled back over the room. Because this contract wasn't formally recorded against the house's title 9 years ago, the title company handling the sale right now has no idea this exists. To them, the property is clear. If this sale closes next Thursday and the money is dispersed into your parents' bank accounts, clawing it back from your sister will take years of brutal litigation, and by then, she will likely have spent it. My heart pounded a slow, heavy rhythm. So how do we stop it? How do we catch the money before it vanishes? Elias leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with professional instinct. "We file a lis pendens immediately. Today." "A what?" "It's a formal notice of pendency of action," Elias explained, his tone sharpening into a weapon. "It flags the title of the house in the public record. The second we file it, the escrow officer will be legally barred from distributing a single dollar or closing the sale until your claim is resolved. We freeze the asset. We stop the clock." "Do it," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, but harder than it had ever been. "And Elias, the math." She said the sale was $2.4 million. "They owe me $840,000. Elias shook his head slightly, pulling a yellow legal pad toward him. "Real estate contracts operate on net proceeds, Ms. Rhodes. You know this. After a standard 6% broker commission and closing taxes, the net will be roughly $2.2 million. 35% of that is $770,000. He paused, looking down at my printed spreadsheet. "However, you also have $42,000 in undocumented loans. We will demand exactly $812,000 as a lump sum settlement to release the lis pendens. We will agree not to sue them for the loans. It's clean, it's exact, and it corners them completely." I looked at the numbers written in his sharp, jagged handwriting. 812,000. It wasn't just money anymore. It was 31 years of respect, finally being collected with interest. "File it," I said, standing up and buttoning my coat. By the end of the day on December 12th, Elias had filed the paperwork with the county clerk. A legal bomb was officially strapped beneath my parents' perfect secret real estate transaction, and the timer was ticking down. 2 days before the scheduled closing, my phone lit up. It was my mother. I stared at the screen for a long time, The lis pendens was already filed, sitting like a loaded gun in the county clerk's system, but the title company hadn't notified my parents yet. It usually took 48 hours for the red flags to fully propagate through the escrow channels. They were still living in their fantasy. I answered, keeping my breathing slow and even. "Hello? Cassidy." My mother's voice vibrated with a sickening artificial joy. It was the voice she used for neighbors and church acquaintances, pitched high and perfectly sweet. "I am just calling with the most exciting news. We are having a massive housewarming celebration for Brianna. Thursday night right after the closing. We rented out the back room at that expensive steakhouse downtown. Aunt Sarah, Uncle David, the cousins, everyone is coming to celebrate your sister's fresh start." A wave of nausea washed over me. They were throwing a party, a literal catered party, funded entirely by my stolen inheritance. And she had the breathtaking audacity to invite me to watch them celebrate it. "You're coming, right?" she pressed, a slight edge of demand creeping into her sugary tone. "It wouldn't be a family celebration without you. You erased me," I thought, my knuckles turning white around my phone. "But you still want me in the family photos." "I have a massive client portfolio due," I lied, my voice as smooth as polished glass. "But I'll try to make it." I hung up. I sat in the quiet of my apartment, listening to the rain tap against the glass. A dark, ugly question began to eat at the edges of my mind. I needed to know the exact dimensions of the betrayal. I needed to know if Brianna was just a dumb, lucky beneficiary who truly believed this was her parents' money to give, or if she was actively complicit. In my line of work, you don't proceed without doing a full risk assessment of your opponent. The next afternoon, Wednesday, I drove to the house. I had a solid excuse. I had left 2 expensive winter coats in the hall closet years ago. The Seattle sky was the color of bruised iron. The neighborhood was dead quiet as I pulled into the driveway. My mother's car was gone. She had mentioned getting her nails done for the big signing. My father's truck was missing, likely making a run to the hardware store for moving supplies. I unlocked the front door with my old key. The hinges gave a soft, familiar squeak. The house felt hollow. The heirloom paintings were already off the walls, leaving pale rectangular ghost marks on the faded wallpaper. Dust motes danced lazily in the cold gray light filtering through the bare windows. The silence was heavy, broken only by a sharp, aggressive sound coming from the kitchen. Rip, packing tape. I stepped out of my shoes and walked silently down the hardwood hallway in my socks. My heart began to thud, a slow, heavy drumbeat in my ears. I didn't want a confrontation. I just wanted to observe. I stopped just out of sight, pressing my back against the cool plaster wall right outside the kitchen doorway. Brianna was aggressively taping a cardboard box on the kitchen island. Her phone was sitting on the granite counter, switched to speakerphone. I could hear the tinny, compressed voice of her best friend Chloe, drifting through the empty room. "I still can't believe they are giving you everything," Chloe was saying, sounding a mix of impressed and deeply skeptical. "Is Cassidy actually going to let that happen? Won't she make trouble?" I held my breath. My chest tightened so much it ached. I closed my eyes, waiting for my sister to defend me, or at least sound guilty. Brianna laughed. It was a careless, airy sound that cut through me like a razor. "Cassidy won't make trouble," Brianna scoffed, ripping another strip of tape. "She's too nice. You know how she is, Chloe. A total pushover when Mom cries. She'll be mad for a week and then she'll just swallow it." My stomach dropped into a bottomless, freezing pit. "Mom said she put in some money years ago," Brianna continued, tossing the tape roll into a box. The casualness of her voice was horrifying. She wasn't ignorant. She knew. But whatever. That's ancient history. Honestly, I need this. I have 3 kids. Dustin left me with nothing. What does Cassidy have to spend money on? Her overpriced, empty apartment? Her boring corporate suits? "I don't know, Bri," Chloe muttered, sounding uncomfortable now. $250,000 is a lot of money to just pretend didn't happen. "Family helps family," Brianna snapped, her tone suddenly defensive and sharp. "She's the understanding one, the quiet one. She's fine. Besides, the $2.4 million won't even go that far in this market. I have to buy a nice house in a safe neighborhood, furnish the whole thing from scratch, pay off my credit cards from the divorce. I'll probably only have like $1.2 million left to invest, but it's a start." I pressed my hands flat against the plaster wall behind me to ground myself. The plaster was freezing. "She's the quiet one. She's fine." I had spent my entire life trying to be the easy child. I had made myself small. I had paid their bills and fixed their mistakes and smiled through their thinly veiled insults, terrified that if I caused any friction they would stop loving me. Standing in that dark, dusty hallway, listening to my sister calculate how quickly she could spend the money I had sacrificed my youth to save, the very last drop of my guilt simply evaporated. It didn't burn away, it just vanished, leaving behind a cold, absolute clarity. She viewed my life as boring, and hers as deserving. She viewed my kindness as a weakness to be exploited. I didn't storm into the kitchen. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. My tears were far too expensive to waste on her. I turned around, walked silently back to the front door, slipped into my shoes and let myself out into the freezing rain. The trap was set. Now all I had to do was watch them step into it. Thursday, December 18th, 9:45 a.m. Pacific Northwest Realty was a fortress of sleek glass and polished steel in downtown Seattle. It smelled like expensive espresso and high-stakes deals. It was my world. Elias and I arrived 15 minutes early. The receptionist put us in a small side office with frosted glass panels. We could see the main conference room clearly, but they couldn't see us. The tension in my chest was so tight it was hard to pull air into my lungs, but my hands were completely steady. I was no longer the quiet, compliant daughter. I was a vice president of wealth management executing a hostile takeover. I watched my family arrive one by one. I watched them like a hawk watching mice in a field. My mother swept in first. She wore a brand new, clearly expensive black dress, her hair perfectly blown out. She practically glided, radiating the arrogant energy of a woman who thought she had just outsmarted the world. My father followed, his shoulders hunched. He kept wiping his palms on his slacks, his eyes darting nervously toward the door. The guilt was eating him alive, but not enough to stop him from taking my money. Then came Brianna. She strutted in wearing a designer wrap dress that still had the faint crease of a store fold. She carried a fancy coffee cup like a trophy, looking like a lottery winner who hadn't even bought a ticket. She had already spent millions in her mind. Finally, the buyers arrived. Robert and Julia Vance, a wealthy older couple, flanked by a sharp-looking attorney. The escrow officer, a stressed woman holding a thick stack of manila folders, took the head of the massive, glossy mahogany table. Elias checked his silver watch. The second hand ticked past the 12. Showtime, Ms. Rhodes. We stepped out of the side office. The heavy glass door to the conference room opened with a soft, expensive swoosh. The cheerful chatter in the room died instantly. It was like someone had pulled the plug on a radio. Brianna blinked, her coffee cup frozen halfway to her mouth. She looked utterly confused. Cassidy? What are you doing here? Why aren't you at work? My mother's head snapped toward me. The bright, victorious smile completely froze on her face. For a split second I saw it. Raw, unadulterated panic flashing in her eyes. Her fingers gripped the edge of her leather chair so hard her knuckles turned white. I didn't smile back. I walked to the far end of the long table, the click of my heels echoing sharply off the glass walls, and took the empty seat. I'm here for the closing, I said evenly. My voice was anchored by years of boardroom negotiations. This is my attorney, Elias Thorne. My father actually grabbed the edge of the table, his face draining of color. Attorney? Cassidy, what is this? Before I could answer, the escrow officer cleared her throat. She looked physically ill, her eyes darting nervously around the room. Actually, Mr. and Mrs. Rhodes, before anyone signs a single page today, we have a major legal issue. She tapped the thick file. Yesterday afternoon, a lis pendens was filed against this title, a formal claim of equity. The room went dead silent. The kind of silence that rings loudly in your ears. That's impossible, my mother shrieked. Her composure shattered completely, her voice cracking into a high pitch. This house is in our name. We have owned it for 30 years. There are absolutely no liens on it. Elias stood up. He didn't yell. He didn't raise his voice. He simply projected absolute authority, his tone dropping the temperature in the room to freezing. The claim was filed by my client, Cassidy Rhodes. In June 2017, she provided $250,000 to clear the mortgage on this property. In exchange, she holds a signed contractual right to 35% of the net equity upon sale. He reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out 5 notarized copies of the 2017 agreement. With a smooth, practiced motion, he slid them down the glossy wooden table. They whispered across the polished surface. One stopped perfectly in front of my father. My father stared at the white paper as if it were a venomous snake about to strike. He didn't touch it. Furthermore, Elias continued, his voice like a hammer hitting an anvil. We are formally demanding the repayment of $42,000 in undocumented loans given to the sellers over the last 9 years. The The total legal lien against this transaction is $812,000. This is a lie, Brianna yelled. She jumped out of her chair, her face turning a blotchy, angry red. Mom, tell them she's lying. She's trying to steal my money. Look at the signature, Brianna, I said softly. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. Robert Vance, the buyer, pushed his chair back violently. The wooden legs scraped loudly against the floor. What the hell is this? He demanded, glaring furiously at my parents. You signed a seller's disclosure stating under oath that there were absolutely no liens or claims on this property. Did you commit perjury to rush this sale? The real estate agent, a woman named Kendra, put her head in her hands, looking like she wanted to disappear. Evelyn, Mark, please tell me this document isn't real. My father finally cracked. The weight of his own weakness crushed him right there in the chair. His shoulders slumped, his chest caving in. I typed it, he whispered. His voice was broken, but loud enough for the entire room to hear. Cassidy gave us the money. I typed the contract. We promised her 35%. Mark, shut your mouth. My mother screamed, completely losing her mind. She turned on me, a manicured finger pointing like a knife. The motherly mask was completely gone, revealing the ugly, selfish truth beneath. You ungrateful, selfish bitch. That was family money. You were paying us back for raising you. You don't need $800,000. Your sister has nothing. You are destroying this family over a piece of paper. Elias leaned forward, resting his hands flat on the table. His voice dropped to a glacial chill. Mrs. Rhodes, I strongly advise you to stop speaking immediately. You have willfully committed misrepresentation on a legal real estate document. You attempted to secretly defraud a partner of their legal equity. If this proceeds to civil court, you will not only lose the $812,000, but you will be liable for my client's massive legal fees and potentially face civil fraud charges from these buyers. The buyer's lawyer snapped his briefcase shut with a sharp click. We are halting this transaction right now. Fix this mess, or we withdraw the offer entirely and sue you for our earnest money. The buyers didn't even say goodbye. They just stood up and walked out. The escrow officer practically ran out of the room right behind them, desperate to escape the blast zone. The sale was dead in the water. Only my family remained. Brianna burst into hysterical, hyperventilating tears, clutching her designer purse. My house, my money, how could you do this to my kids, Cassidy? You're a monster. I stood up. I slowly buttoned my tailored blazer. I looked at my mother, whose face was twisted in pure hatred. I looked at my father, who was crying silently and couldn't even meet my eyes. And I looked at my sister, who was mourning the loss of a fortune she hadn't earned a single penny of. I didn't do this to you, I said. My voice was eerily calm. The hollow, desperate space inside my chest was finally gone, replaced by solid, unbreakable steel. You did this to yourselves. You had 9 years to honor your word. You had 9 years to just tell me you were selling. Instead, you tried to rob me blind and throw a party with the stolen money. I picked up my purse and looked directly into my mother's furious eyes. I will release the hold on the title the exact moment $812,000 is wired to my attorney's trust account, not a second before. I turned my back on them, the heavy glass door of the conference room swooshing shut behind me. But the chaos didn't stay contained. Before Elias and I could even reach the elevators, the situation behind us exploded. I heard the crash of a chair hitting the floor, followed by my mother's feral, unhinged screaming. The escrow officer, terrified by the sudden violence, hit the panic button under her desk. Within 10 minutes, the flashing red and blue lights of the Seattle Police Department were bouncing off the sleek marble walls of the lobby. The aftermath was a blur of cold, professional detachment. The police separated us. An officer with kind, tired eyes pulled me aside near the revolving doors, his radio crackling softly. He asked me for a statement, noting that the buyer's attorney was filing a preliminary report for real estate fraud. Rhodes, your mother attempted to physically grab the legal documents, the officer said gently, his pen hovering over his notepad. Do you want to press charges? I looked across the massive lobby. My mother was sitting on a cold stone bench, her expensive black dress twisted, her perfect hair ruined. She was sobbing into her hands while another officer stood over her. In that moment, a sudden piercing memory flashed through my mind. I was 6 years old, sitting on the floor while she brushed my hair. You're my good, quiet girl, Cassidy, she had whispered. You never make things hard for me. My heart physically ached. A deep, heavy grief settled into my bones. The woman on the bench wasn't a criminal mastermind. She was just a selfish, aging woman who had finally run out of lies. No, I told the officer, my voice numb and hollow. No charges from me. The civil courts will handle the money. I walked out of the building with Elias, my heels clicking sharply on the wet pavement. I stepped out into the crisp, freezing Seattle air, and for the first time in my entire life I could breathe deeply. The fallout over the next few days was apocalyptic. My mother went nuclear. Desperate to control the narrative, she called every aunt, uncle, and cousin in our extended family. She sobbed on the phone about how I had ambushed them, claiming I was a greedy monster trying to leave my nieces and nephews homeless over a misunderstood loan. But I was ready. I didn't cry, and I didn't argue. I treated it like a hostile corporate takeover. I drafted a single, perfectly professional email to the entire extended family list. Subject: clarification on the Rhodes property dispute. I attached a PDF of the signed 2017 agreement. I attached the bank wire receipt for the initial $250,000. I attached my Excel spreadsheet detailing the $42,000 in furnace and tax bailouts. I wrote exactly one sentence. I paid off my parents' mortgage 9 years ago so they could live comfortably. They sold the house and attempted to secretly funnel my legal equity to Brianna. I am simply enforcing the contract they signed. The narrative flipped instantly. The silence from my mother's side of the family was deafening. That night, Aunt Sarah called me. "Cassidy," she sighed, sounding exhausted. "Your mother did the exact same thing when your grandmother died. She tried to steal my share of the jewelry, claiming she needed it more. Stick to your guns, honey. Do not back down." By Monday, December 22nd, my parents' backs were against the wall. The buyers were threatening to walk away entirely and sue for damages. The carrying costs on the empty, unsold house were bleeding my parents dry. My mother's own lawyer had bluntly told her she would be absolutely slaughtered in a courtroom. We met one last time at Elias's office to sign the final settlement. When my parents walked in, they looked 10 years older. The arrogant energy was completely gone, replaced by the heavy, sunken posture of defeat. My mother refused to look at me. She stared blankly at the mahogany desk, her jaw clenched so tight I thought her teeth might crack. The paperwork was incredibly simple. They authorized the title company to distribute $812,000 directly to me from the net proceeds. In exchange, I signed a release of the lien. Elias slid the paper toward my father. He picked up the pen, his hand shaking violently. Before he could sign, I placed my hand flat on the document, stopping him. I looked directly into his tired, bloodshot eyes. "Say it." The room was agonizingly quiet. I could hear the rain lashing against the window pane. He swallowed hard, his throat clicking. "It was your money, Cassidy," he whispered, his voice cracking. A single tear slipped down his weathered cheek. "We were wrong. I am so deeply sorry I let it get this far. I should have protected you." "Just sign the damn paper," my mother hissed to the wall, her voice dripping with bitter venom, "so Brianna can get whatever is left." Even after my cut, they still walked away with over $1.3 million. Brianna was still going to get her fresh start, just a slightly smaller one. My father signed. I signed. It was over. The wire transfer cleared my bank account on the morning of December 24th, Christmas Eve. The poetic justice wasn't lost on me. I sat alone in my apartment drinking black coffee and stared at the banking app on my phone. Available balance, $825. My grandfather's gift had returned to me, fortified by my own boundaries. It is now April 2026. It's been 4 months since the closing. My life is fundamentally different, mostly inside my own head. I used the money to buy a beautiful modern 3-story townhome in Queen Anne, overlooking the Seattle skyline. I invested the rest in high-yield index funds. My relationship with my family is permanently altered, but perhaps it's finally honest. My mother and I barely speak. She sends obligatory passive-aggressive holiday texts, still tightly clinging to her victimhood. My father, however, has been trying. We get coffee once a month. It is awkward and painful, but he is in therapy now, finally untangling his decades of enabling her toxic behavior. The biggest shock was Brianna. She didn't have a magical, instant redemption. Real life doesn't work that way. For the first 2 months, she posted vicious quotes on Facebook about toxic family members cutting you off. But reality eventually set in, with only about $600,000 handed to her. Since my parents had to use a chunk of the remaining money to buy their own condo, she couldn't afford the luxury lifestyle she had blindly envisioned. Last week, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Brianna. It was messy, resentful, but painfully real. "I'm in a 2-bedroom apartment," she wrote. "Dustin is fighting me for custody because I don't have a big yard. I still hate how you handled things, and I hate you for humiliating Mom. but I applied for a job as a receptionist today because Mom refused to give me any of her retirement money to buy a bigger place. So I guess I have to work now. Happy? I stared at the screen for a long time. I didn't feel angry anymore. I just felt a quiet, heavy pity. I replied, "It's hard at first, but making your own money is the only way. Nobody can ever take it from you. Good luck with the interview." She left me on read. That's fine. I'm sitting on my new rooftop deck as I tell you this. The wind is cold, but the sun is shining brightly over the water. The one-page document from 2017 is framed on my home office desk downstairs. It's not a trophy of a family war. It's a reminder. For 31 years, I thought being a good daughter meant making myself small. I thought it meant giving endlessly, absorbing their blows, and hoping they would eventually value me. They didn't. They never would have, because my endless compliance taught them that I didn't require respect. If you are reading this, and you are the reliable one, the ATM, the understanding one in a family that exploits your kindness, listen to me very carefully. Boundaries without consequences are just suggestions. Keep your records, put your worth in writing, and never ever let guilt convince you to give up the foundation you've built for yourself. You deserve to take up space. Stories like this aren't just about money. They are about the raw, sometimes painful process of finding your own voice when the world tries to drown it out. If Cassidy's journey resonated with you, or if it gave you the strength to stand your ground today, please consider liking this post and subscribing. Your support helps us bring more of these deep, unfiltered human truths to light. Join our community for more powerful narratives, because your story and the boundaries you set matter more than you know. Take care of yourself, because if you don't, nobody else will.